Today, the new book, The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, an investigation by New York Times reporters Robin Pogrebin and Kate Kelly, was officially published after a weekend that saw an excerpt of the book published in the New York Times move several Democratic presidential candidates to call for Brett Kavanaugh's impeachment from the Supreme Court. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is a Democratic presidential candidate, went into action by demanding from the FBI and the Justice Department, quote, all communications between the White House and the FBI regarding the scope of the background investigation and supplemental background investigation. The new book shows that the FBI did not investigate dozens of claims by people, including classmates of Brett Kavanaugh's at Yale, who believed the accusations against Brett Kavanaugh at his confirmation hearing were consistent with behavior they had seen or heard about at Yale. Last night on this program, the authors of the new book described some of those witnesses.
We both spoke to numerous people from Justice Kavanaugh's high school, as well as Yale, and other parts of his life as well, who contacted the FBI. There was a school teacher who was in his class at Georgetown Prep in San Francisco, took a day off, prepared a letter, worked with a lawyer, went to the FBI office there, was turned away, was told to call the tip line, was told to file an online form. He did all of these things, and there was no follow-up. He felt that he was never heard. He was extremely frustrated. And we heard this story over and over again from people.
Joining us now is Amy Klobuchar, Democratic senator from Minnesota, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and a presidential candidate. Senator Klobuchar, what was your reaction when you read the New York Times article about this on Sunday?
Well, I would say it wasn't one of surprise, Lawrence. And I think you know my role in that hearing. I was the one that was calmly asking the judge, trying to mesh the stories, the credible story of Dr. Blasey Ford with his story. And I asked him if perhaps he had blacked out. That's why I didn't remember. And then he shot back at me and asked me if I blacked out. He later apologized, but that has been forever etched in my memory. And part of what I thought about this whole thing was, one, he shouldn't have been handpicked to begin with. He was handpicked because of his expansive view of executive power. But then secondly, the way he behaved at that hearing, put aside even the facts, was outrageous. And he brought down not just the Supreme Court, but the whole judiciary with his demeanor and how he was so partisan during that hearing. From there, as you know, it launched into this additional, very brief FBI investigation to explore some of these other allegations. And that's something I've never really had much time to talk about, and why I'm not surprised at all by their findings. And that is that we were put into this room, and we had 1 hour, and then the other party took an hour, and then we could come back. And I went back there 3 or 4 times. And it was literally stacks of documents like this, all mixed up together. There would be cranks, basically like tips, strange tips that were called in, just nutty things. But then mixed in would be an actual one, like what you may have just referred to, things like that. And it was impossible to triage. And then you add to that the calls I got, as well as other senators got, which we then tried to report. And I look at this more than just the FBI. It's really an issue of the White House that was limiting the focus of this investigation. And that's why I've called to get those documents. I think that's what we need. We need those documents. And I know it's similar to what the House is talking about. You can't make a decision about impeachment or anything like that until you have this underlying information.
When the process was stopped by Dr. Ford's emergence, and there came a point where Jeff Flake decided to basically join with the Democrats to delay the confirmation process and have more of an FBI background check. What was very clear pretty quickly was that, okay, this was going to be a time-limited FBI background check. And once I heard that the FBI background check is time-limited, I think we all knew then it can't possibly be complete, because, I mean, you know that the background checks that they run on your confirmations, they don't have any time limit on it. They don't
Right.
deliver you a background check until they have finished it, and some of them take longer than others for a bunch of reasons.
Exactly. I mean, I've had numerous judicial nominees, U.S. attorney nominees that went on for months, and they look up people from their past, from high school, like you're talking about, from college, and can take a long time. And so that's why this time limit made it very hard to look into all of these tips and allegations. But the concerning part is when you see those, again, I can't reveal what I saw, but when you see these, you know there were people that desperately wanted to be contacted and had information. And it was just a sham is what it was in the end. And it's very unfortunate for our democracy, and that's why I've continued to believe, and I've always believed, that two sets of things have to come out. The first is the 100,000 pages of documents from the time that he worked in the White House and the White House counsel's office. We were denied access to those documents to begin with, and the second were these that we just discussed. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, Lawrence, that I really want to be president, because I think, one, we have to nominate judges that have the integrity to never act like that again at a hearing, and that we also want to have a process that works, a vetting process that the public would be proud of. And that is not what happened with this president when he handpicked this nominee.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.